Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be with you all today to speak about the organizational profile and specifically identifying and stratifying your workforce profile. So the organizational profile within the Sterling criteria, again, tells us what is important to your organization. Just as John Keevan shared, it is your executive summary. And while there are many things that are important to your organization, the organizational profile gives us that kind of that starting point of the organizational assessment and those key components that are important to your organization. So it sets the context for understanding your organization, and it also helps us identify key aspects about your organization and any gaps in that information as you go throughout the assessment process. So again, talking about, we're going to talk a little bit more about the workforce profile, and this is something that is very near and dear to me. Being a human resources professional, I am all things people, all things work and the workplace. And so at the heart of your organization or of any organization is its talent. And so when you're working on your organizational profile, specifically related to your workforce, it is how do you segment, what are your employee groups and how do you segment your workforce? What are some of those key educational and I've added or skill requirements of your various workforce groups? What are those key drivers of engagement? Realizing that you may be in a different industry or type of organization. So do you have organized bargaining units or union representation within your workforce? And what are those requirements of those individuals or those groups? And then what are those special health and safety requirements of your workforce? Your workforce is the key component to your strategy. For me, and that's all I always say, that is execution. So this is how the work gets done. This is how your mission, your vision, and the values of the organization are carried out. And so the very first question is, what recent changes have you experienced regarding your workforce? These last 2 years have certainly presented its challenges and changes as it relates to the workforce. We are dealing in a time where a lot of organizations are dealing with what we call the Great Resignation or the turnover tsunami. And so we are seeing a change in recruitment and retention and proactive strategies or being more strategic about how do we recruit and retain our talent. And so that is a change that organizations have experienced regarding their workforce. Workplace flexibility, especially as a result of the pandemic, a lot of organizations have re-examined their workforce flexibility options or have even begun implementing those workplace flexibility options. And then also, how does the work get done within your organization? Again, many employees have not returned to the office or organizations have implemented a hybrid model. And so what recent changes have you experienced? And there may even be changes with skill set as well. And we'll talk about skill set and education requirements. And then how do you segment your workforce? Recognizing that every individual is unique. All the needs of your workforce are very different. And so how do you break down your workforce groups to meet those various needs and requirements of those groups? Examples of workforce segmentation could be your senior leadership group, management. I know when I worked at FB&C Business Management, we had various groups because we had a call center. And so the requirements of our call center team members were very different. So that was a group, a segmentation of our workforce as well as our account management team, which was very different. Their requirements were very different than our managers. And so how do you segment your workforce to meet those various needs and requirements of those individuals? What are the educational requirements of your different employee groups? And so looking at those various groups and various segments of your workforce, what are those educational requirements? And I like to challenge organizations to look just beyond educational requirements, because we are in a time where organizations are looking at competency, not just educational requirements. So they're looking at individuals with specific competencies and specific skills, not necessarily a degree or a certificate. And while the degree or the certificate or the certification is needed, organizations are also looking at competencies, and what are those requirements of the various workforce groups. Just to give you an example, if you are in account management, and I'm just using that example, a competency would be negotiation skills. And so that would be a competency for that workforce group. And then another topic that I am passionate about is, what are those key drivers of engagement of your workforce? And I like to spend a few minutes talking about employee engagement and the difference between engagement and satisfaction, because there is a distinct difference. And I teach about and talk about this all the time. Satisfaction is how I feel in that moment. I can be completely satisfied and completely disengaged within my workplace, or I can be vice versa. I can be dissatisfied and highly engaged. And so employee engagement, think of it as the head, the heart, and the hands. It's the employee's intellectual and emotional connection with an employer that is demonstrated by motivation and commitment to positively impact the company's vision and goals. And so if you think about above and beyond, when you hear above and beyond, that is employee engagement. That is that discretionary effort that an employee expends. And also those engagement drivers are very different for your various workforce. And so I'll give a demonstration of what that looks like later on in this presentation, what key drivers of engagement are. But these are items that are very unique to your various workforce groups. And then what are your health and safety requirements? Depending on your industry or depending on your sector, there will be various health and safety requirements. Also, there will be various health and safety requirements for those various workforce groups or for the various segments of your workforce. But I also want to challenge organizations to not look at the obvious health and safety requirements. We are in a time where mental health is very important, and we're all dealing with some challenges as a result of the pandemic. And so when we think about health and safety requirements, make sure that you're also considering what are those mental health components or mental health requirements that are required of the workforce, and what that looks like for each of those groups. So just to give you a pictorial image of what the workforce profile should look like, this is just a chart that shows the various workforce groups. So for this organization, we have leadership, middle management, we have our office staff, maybe field staff, the number of employees that are within those groups. And so we have broken it down so that way we know how many team members are in those various workforce groups. What are their education or certification requirements for each group? And then what are those engagement drivers? And so sometimes the engagement drivers may be the same for multiple groups. I would argue to say that all drivers of engagement are not the same for all employees and all workforce groups. And so your ability to be able to segment that information allows you to be able to create a more customizable experience for your workforce. And then what are the health and safety requirements of each of those individual workforces? And then I'll open it up for a few questions and answers. But just before I turn it over to you, Laura, for questions and answers, I also wanted to share a few resources that are available to organizations as they work towards determining what those key drivers of engagement are. There are resources such as the Gallup Q12 survey, where it measures specifically employee engagement, and you're able to have your employees complete that assessment and be able to segment those drivers for each of your workforce groups. There's also surveys such as the Best Companies Group and the Great Places to Work survey, which also measure employee satisfaction and engagement, but it also allows you to be able to segment those drivers of engagement for your various workforce groups. So thank you all for having me, and I will turn it over to you, Laura, for Q&A.
Awesome. That was fantastic, Monique. That was great information. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yes, and I did take some summary notes. So the first note I wrote down was use segmentation to understand your workforce needs and how to engage the workforce more meaningfully. The second one was segmentation can also identify educational, skills-related, and benefit-specific needs that can give you an edge advantage. I love that, edge advantage. Make sure to track and understand the impact of organizational or industry changes to workforce and workforce segments. And then, boy, to cap it off was the whole engagement requires the head and the heart connections with the organization's objectives to drive highly motivated outcomes through the workforce's hands. I love that. Great job. Thank you for all of those. Also, the links to Monique, will be sure to capture those and share those with the participants from today's call. But I do have a couple of questions here, actually. Can you share a situation where segmentation has led you to learn something that you believe you otherwise would not have known?
Absolutely. And so I'll use a very recent example. And while I'm not at the organization anymore, our ability, when I worked at FBMC Benefits Management, again, we had a call center. And so right during the start of the pandemic, we deployed all of our workforce to be work remotely as we kind of navigated through the current pandemic. And so we were able, by being able to segment our workforce groups, we were able to see the unique needs of our call center team members because they were working from home. And so because the nature of their job, they needed specific equipment and resources available for them to be able to do their job. And so our ability to be able to segment or parse out that group to specifically meet their needs, being able to segment that group out really helped us create a more focus on the unique needs of that group.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. How does segmentation build inclusiveness as opposed to an increasingly microscopic view of workforce differences and diversity? So instead of continuing to look at the differences, how does segmentation, or how could segmentation build more of an inclusive community within the workforce?
So I often say what we find when we segment is that we're more alike than we are different. But without being able to specifically look at the similarities of our various groups, we are not able to pinpoint what those specific similarities are. And so while the approach to an organization should be very inclusive, your ability to be able to segment that really shows those similarities across those various workforce groups.
Awesome. So I think we can squeeze one more question in. We're right at time, but let's squeeze one in. Okay. What triggers would you suggest that a reassessment on segmentation approaches should take place? So at what point in time would some sort of a trigger say, hey, we need to go look at how we're segmenting things? What would those triggers?
I honestly, so I would naturally go to data, right? If your data is telling you something differently, or if your data shows a change, that is a trigger. But I also would challenge organizations to continuously look at your workforce, look at the overall organization and not wait for a specific trigger. Be able to kind of forecast or see any changes in the environment and how that can impact your organization, or any changes within your industry and how that can impact your workforce as well. And so, I mean, data is an obvious trigger, but I also challenge organizations to not wait for a specific trigger, but to continuously evaluate, even if everything is okay, still evaluate and look at your workforce, look at your organization, look at these trends, because it will tell you, it allows you to be more proactive than reactive.
Yeah, that's so true. Very, very true. Thank you so much, Monique. So as a reminder, check in at floridasterling.com or sterlingcouncil.com for additional content from today's session, including the access to the summary notes. We are also trying to post a link this week in the chat window that you can access the summary notes directly to Facebook or LinkedIn. The video will be posted within 24 hours to the YouTube channel, so that will be out there by tomorrow. And then don't forget to join us next week on March 15th for a leadership briefing on understanding your organizational structure. It will be featuring Mary Beth Corris, who is one of our favorite Sterling and Baldrige Master Examiners. Feel free to join us early next week at noon for a replay of Monique's presentation from today. And until then, I hope you all have a very, very happy week ahead.